Pegasus spyware has been in the news. You may have just had your Apple iPhone update itself. Pegasus spyware is apparently a spyware program that was loaded onto, my understanding is virtually every iPhone, iPad, Mac, iWatch in existence.
When?
Well, I'm going to get there.
Okay.
So this program was essentially a backdoor, and it was a zero-click exploit, which means that in the past you might have gotten an email that you would have to open an infected file in order for your computer to be infected, so a person could be careful and not click things from people they didn't know or files that looked funny. In this case, that was not true. The file could land in your computer or your iPhone, and the exploit could be delivered. And this exploit, which was created by an Israeli company, the NSO Group, a very cryptic entity, allowed access to your email, your phone calls, your text messages, could apparently allow your camera and microphone to be turned on without your knowledge. Now, I would just point out, if your neighbor figured out how to do this to your phone or your computer, right? Your neighbor was just curious about your life, and they figured out how to use your computer in order to spy on you. They looked through your email, your text messages, and all of that stuff. You would be beyond irate, right? This is such an incredible invasion of privacy. To have a private entity set up the conditions for this, and then apparently sell access to the data of individuals to their enemies and competitors, right? They sold access to the devices of, for example, activists to the governments that opposed them, right? This is such an asymmetry, right? The activists would have had no mechanism for buying the same information about government officials. So this is just a completely asymmetrical mechanism for preventing change, right? So this exploit existed. They got it onto the majority of Apple devices. They then sold access to enemies of people. I would point out, the reason I wanted to raise this is that I think we have to start asking the question, how much effect has this had on recent history? How much effect does this have on what we think is true? Right? Yep. How many of the people who might have been telling you some uncomfortable truth have been unable to do so because their enemies knew all sorts of things about them that prevented them from reaching the position they would otherwise have ended up in? It's a very difficult question, and we don't know the answer. What we know is...
How is the answer even knowable? I don't think the answer is knowable.
The answer is not knowable, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, we got a patch that just got delivered over the air that eliminated this malware. But okay, so we know maybe is one thing, but also how many others are there? So we know about Pegasus. Are there other exploits like this that are lurking in our devices? If you said, well, my goodness, I can't believe that Apple allowed this to happen. I'm going to get a different phone. Well, okay, now you're in Google's universe, right? So there doesn't seem to be an escape, right? There are ways that you can do other things. There are phones that have been de-Googled and things. How good a protection is that? It's a little hard to say, but we're stuck in this paradigm where the exact things that we know are necessary for progress, the ability for people to talk with each other, the things that are protected in our Constitution for exactly this reason, right? They can't stop you from gathering with other people and talking to them and saying what needs to be said. And it doesn't mean that what's said is necessarily good or right, but you have to protect that right in order for history to work, right? And so we're losing this, and it's barely noticed. So what I discovered in researching Pegasus in advance of this podcast is that apparently Pegasus isn't even new, right? Malwarebytes reports, you want to show the Malwarebytes link that I sent you? Malwarebytes, which is an industry group, they sell anti-malware products, says that this isn't even new, that they've known about this since 2016.
So I can't see the date on this article. This article is new and responsive to the current wave.
Which was triggered by a privacy group having analyzed the phone of a dissident who had had his phone infected. or not just infected, because apparently they were all infected, but exploited, right? Mm-hmm. And so
how does a person come to know that their phone has been exploited?
Well, that's just the thing, is apparently there's some group of 50,000 phone numbers that have had special access gained. Maybe 10,000 have been actively surveilled, but we don't know what those numbers are. And they're, it isn't easy. I did encounter there's some mechanism that an infected phone, there's a mechanism you could back it up to a computer and then do some command line work with a tool to see if the files that would be generated in the functioning of this exploit are present, right? But that's, first of all, that's not a simple thing to do, right? Yeah. So most people will just simply not know. Likely your phone got updated without you even knowing what was going on. Mm-hmm. So the evidence may be gone. But for God's sake, this is an incredible moment where for one thing, look, we all have this person in our life, or we are this person who says, if we're going to talk about important things, maybe the phone shouldn't be in the room. Maybe we should put them in the fridge. Maybe we should go take a walk, right? We all have that person. And we all think that's probably it's got to be unnecessary, right? It's true. We now know that thing is there. And if you're talking about stuff that doesn't change the world, it probably doesn't matter. And if you're talking about stuff that does change the world, then you got to ask yourself the question, is somebody going to listen in? Are they going to figure out what I do understand and what I don't understand? Are they going to figure out who I suspect and who I trust and play us off against each other like a fiddle?
I think getting back to your point about the neighbor, if a neighbor did this, it would be clear to everyone why this is totally unacceptable. And the idea that it's an anonymous company that may or may not be doing it should, in fact, give us no comfort. I would say it's quite the opposite. At least a neighbor is a real person who could be talked to, whatever nefarious purposes they might be up to. But there's no reasoning with an abstract entity that has made a move on, it sounds like, at least tens of thousands, if not well more than that, of people and their devices. And there's no accountability, and there's no, to go back to our earlier point, reversibility, in that once this thing has been breached, as Malwarebytes is saying has happened, has been true for a long time. Now that this capability exists, it will continue to exist. There's no going back to a world in which this capacity does not exist.
Right. You would have to build for it. And there's no question.
Well, that's a possibility.
If you compare the neighbor having done this to you to some anonymous, murky security corporation in some foreign state, there's no question that the neighbor is a far better scenario. As infuriating as that is, right? To have an economic entity gain access to your phone and then be able to sell it to your enemies is just so troubling.
Yeah, well, at some level, this is also consistent with a theme that we've heard ourselves talking about over and over and over again with regard to the benefit of engaging with physical reality and physical space over entirely social reality, or in this case, abstract reality, where I think it may not have ever been said by whoever it was attributed to, but the idea that good fences make good neighbors, somehow that's apocryphal, but good fences might make good neighbors.
It's not apocryphal, but the poem means roughly the opposite of what people think it means.
That's right, yeah. But the fact is that fences are a reality, and fences can be built. And if you do have a neighbor who is spying, you can actually erect physical things and you can talk to the person. Whereas there is neither nothing to erect except with similar tools, which most of us don't have access to, nor is there anyone to talk to. In part, see your earlier point about customer service, right? That itself is a dishonorable system, even largely in companies that are themselves trying to be honorable.
Right. Now, look, the first step to solving this problem is admitting that we have a need for a constitution-like entity that declares our right not to have this happen to us, right? And that we are therefore, we are entitled to devices in which this is impossible, and those who breach it are committing a crime, and obviously, in some sense, this needs to be global.
Yeah. But so by the way, those who would say, well, this doesn't apply, the Constitution doesn't apply here, so what are you complaining about? Well, then we have discovered the reason that the Constitution or something like it needs to apply, needs to be invented, needs to be widely deployed immediately, because we are clearly in need of it.
Right, which is why the principle, our Hanukkah principle, says that you need skepticism of ancient wisdom, because the point is our Constitution is effectively ancient. It did not envision the technological world we would live in. It did not understand the possibility of corporations that would be more powerful than nations.
Yeah, it was incredibly forward-thinking, like such amazing predictive power, and yet it's just too old to be fully up to the task of right now.
Right. The values are right, but the prescription it's not wrong, but it's inadequate to the full scale of the problems. I would also point out, though, that something I haven't really seen explored is for there to be a corporation that generated this very expensive and highly effective exploit, which can be obliterated apparently in a single update of the iOS software. Mm-hmm. There has to have been a market. That is to say, the kinds of people who have enemies apparently know that they can buy access to their phones enough that it happens. Either that or the NSO group is approaching people and saying, we have information on people who don't like you. Would you like it? And here's the price. Somehow there's a world of people that is effectively trafficking in our private information and doing so on the basis of our political perspectives or our scientific viewpoint or who knows what it might be. But it's a very frightening world. And they
once they have the data, they can parse it however they like.
Right. And the fact that this is not that this is a news story among many rather than hey, what effect is this having on what news I even know about? Right. That's the level we need to think about this. How has this affected the world that I live in? What would the world look like absent this force? To what extent has Apple eliminated one such entity and there are others still playing this role?
Yeah.
These are all important questions.
Yeah.